Okay, good morning, everybody. Good our Shabbos. This coming week, we have the privilege of celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut, commemorating the day on which Israel was created as a modern political state. It's something that people dreamed about for years, and it became a reality May 14th, 1948, which was Shiur, which has been celebrated ever since. The nature of those celebrations, however, is open to a great deal of discussion. If you look at Chazal, Rishonim, Achronim, even going back to the Gemara, there is a concept that when great miracles happen to the Jewish people, there is an obligation to praise Hashem for bringing us through this miracle, and usually that involves the recitation of Hallel. And this has been the position of Rishonim and Achronim throughout the ages.
Recording.
There have been occasions when certain events took place in Jewish history where people, in fact, did recite Hallel. Then you get involved in the technical halachic requirements, full Hallel, half Hallel, with a bracha, without a Hallel, and that same machlokas exists today in terms of Yom HaAtzmaut. You should be aware that ever since 1948, one of the members of the chief rabbinate, the rabbinate in 1948 took a position that the creation of the state of Israel was a modern miracle and in fact required the recitation of Hallel. And Rav Meshulam Roth, one of the members of the Rabbanut HaRashit at that time, in one of his chuvos in the Sefer Kol Mevaser, laid out all the halachic reasons and precedents why, in fact, halacha was not only suggested and permissible, but even mandated. I don't know if you can all see it. This is a siddur for Yom HaAtzmaut. It's been published in various editions, and this particular one, the standard one, it's put out by the World Zionist Movement, Seder HaTfilot L'Yom HaAtzmaut, and in addition to the full davening, it has all the sources that are brought down for generations before the state of Israel for this type of a miraculous event that takes place. The Gedolim at the time were split in 1948 as to the religious significance of Yom HaAtzmaut. Obviously, everybody welcomed the fact that now we had our own state. And I'm not getting into the political Zionism issues of other countries that were suggested. That's a fascinating story all by itself. The fact that some Zionist leaders were willing to go to Africa or Uganda or Tunisia as other locations for a modern state of Israel. The fact that ultimately it was rejected is a separate history story by itself. But the fact that when Israel was created, and I don't know how many of you were around, but May 5th was a Friday night. And at the UN vote that took place on Friday night, many families, religious families, left their radios on. Nobody had television, but everybody left their radios on Friday night, listening to the vote. Or many people did, in fact. And of course, there was tremendous jubilation and celebration when the vote was passed, and Israel Ben-Gurion made his famous speech in Tel Aviv, which was supposed to be at a secret location, but everybody knew all about it, and everybody celebrated. Practice in the modern Orthodox Jewish community is fairly standardized by now, and that is that most synagogues will recite Hallel, most without a bracha, to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut. In the more Zionistic congregations or groups, not only will they recite full Hallel with a bracha, but they will daven a yontiftik psuke de zimra, and they'll also have a special haftorah for Yom HaAtzmaut, which was the same haftorah that's read on the last day of Pesach, Od Hayom B'Nov. So celebrations vary. In Israel, there are secular celebrations, which are very interesting. For some reason, it has developed that in Israel, part of the celebration involves barbecues. I don't know why. Of course, big parades.
Like the 4th of July.
Like the 4th of July. Okay, good comparison.
I think that's where they got it from.
Maybe.
That's where they got it from, I think.
And they also have these plastic bopping hammers for some reason, where you bop people on the head. I don't know why that became a minhag also. But in any event, the disparity among poskim is very, very clear. Even those poskim that are pro-Israel or pro-Zionist would not be prepared to fully support the recitation of Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut, which is interesting. Let's put it that way. Rav Soloveitchik was of the opinion that we don't have the ability today to declare a holiday. He didn't say you can't say Hallel. He begrudgingly said you should say half Hallel without a bracha. Now, at yeshiva, where he davened during the week, nobody actually knew what the Rav did, because he stood in the corner with a talus over his head when everybody else was saying Hallel. And nobody really knew what he was doing. His brother, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik Zal, was a little more inclined towards the recitation of Hallel. In our shul, of course, we recite Hallel without a bracha. I once heard a student of Soloveitchik say, if you really believe that it was a miracle, say it with a bracha. So you have this disparity, and there are those who don't say Hallel at all, who don't celebrate it as a holiday. Now, I just want to point out an interesting historical fact. Holidays that are not biblical, you have Purim and you have Hanukkah. Purim was an older holiday than Hanukkah, and it was closer to the biblical period, and it was celebrated communally from an early period. Hanukkah did not develop organically so quickly. It took many hundreds of years for the celebration of Hanukkah to morph into what it is today. The events took place in the first century before the Common Era, and they were still arguing about it in Babylonia 500 years later as to how to celebrate it. So it wasn't certain events that are national in scope take a while to emerge fully acceptable to the Jewish community. I am convinced, although there is a split in the Haredi community and the non-Haredi community, that in 500 years from now, assuming Mashiach hasn't come by then, that Yom HaAtzmaut will be celebrated as a normative holiday. It's just based on what people do. Whether we have the ability as an organized rabbinate to ordain a holiday, to authorize a holiday, it's a separate discussion. For example, one of Yom HaShoah was proclaimed. We observed it this past week. Yom HaShoah was proclaimed by the Knesset as a day to commemorate the Holocaust. Rabbis were not involved in that. And the question is, do we accept, as an Orthodox Jewish community, the decision of the Knesset to create another Jewish observance? Some say yes, some say no. Halachically, does the Knesset function like a melech? There are different arguments about it. However, the rabbinate, chief rabbinate, and rabbis around the world set aside Asara B'Teves as the official memorial day for the Shoah. Is it observed by the broader Jewish community as such? Generally not. And interesting enough, on Tisha B'Av, there are a number of Hasidic rabbis of prominence who have written kinos. Rav Schwab from Reuters has written a kina for the Shoah that is recited in many communities on Tisha B'Av. So it takes a while for certain observances to emerge. I want to point out something very, very fascinating before I go any further. Again, if you look at the official siddur for Yom HaTzmaut, tremendous collection of sources from Chazal talking about the ultimate creation of a homeland for the Jews in many, many ways, and the obligation to recite Hallel. But I want to refer to something in the Kabbalah. Fascinating thing that I've always been amazed by. There is a concept called Atbash, Aleph Taf Beis Shin, referring to the Hebrew alphabet, that certain letters correspond. Aleph corresponds to Taf, Beis corresponds to Shin, in reverse order. And if you apply Atbash to holidays, we find the most fascinating thing. And this is worthwhile writing down, because this is something that is just amazing. If you use the days of Pesach, there are 7 days of Pesach. The first day of Pesach, Aleph, corresponds to Tuf, the same day of the week in which Tisha B'Av occurs. Aleph Tuf. First day of Pesach is the same day of the week that Tisha B'Av, which is one of the reasons why you have an egg on the Seder plate, not only for the Korban Chagiga, but also to remind you of Tisha B'Av. Beis, second day of Pesach, corresponds to Shin, the same day of the week that Shavuos will occur. Gimel, third day of Pesach, corresponds to Reish, Rosh Hashanah, same day of the week. Whatever. Dalet corresponds to Kuf, Kriyas Torah, Simchas Torah. Hey, the fifth day of Pesach, corresponds Hey Tzadi, Stone, Yom Kippur, same day of the week. Vav, the sixth day of Pesach, corresponds to Hey, Purim. Zayin, the seventh day of Pesach, has no partner, no Ben Zug, until 1948. Zayin corresponds to Ayin, Asma'ut. Amazing. I didn't make it up. But Zayin remained without a partner, and the rabbis tried to figure something out. It's the most fascinating thing in the world. Something to worth writing down to talk about this week on Yom HaTzmaut, Atbash. There's also another very, very important medrash. If you Google 3 oaths, the Gimel Shavuos, the 3 oaths, Wikipedia has a nice, interesting article about it. There's a famous medrash quoted in the Gemara that there were 3 oaths. 2 of them imposed upon the Jewish people by God, 1 imposed on the nations of the world. The 3 oaths were as follows. 1 oath was God commanded the Jewish people not to conquer Israel with force, not to establish the state of Israel by force. Didn't phrase it in those terms, but lo ya'aleh b'koach. The second shvuah, the second oath that was imposed upon Israel by God, according to the Medrash, they should not rebel against the nations among whom they live. And the third oath was imposed on the nations of the world not to subjugate the Jews. Famous Gimel oaths, the Gimel Shvuos. So according to the Satmar Rebbe, since one of the oaths was you're not allowed to conquer Israel with an army, with Koach, and you had to wait until Mashiach comes in order for all the Jews to go back to Israel. Therefore, he was opposed to Zionism. Now, of course, this has been refuted by many rabbis in contemporary times. Rabbi Norman Lamb wrote a very famous critique of that. And the Satmar Rebbe went even further. Aside from his opposition to the creation of the state of Israel, he wrote a sefer called Al HaGeula of Al HaTamura about the 6-Day War, which called the 6-Day War Ma'aseh Satan. I mean, he was very opposed. And of course, many members of his community, the Neturei Karta especially, are vocally. Now, again, it's a very small and vocal group. The headquarters, I think, are in England. They're a very small group, but they're a very noisy group in their opposition to Israel and their support of terrorist groups wishing to destroy the state of Israel.
Wally.
How they can.
Wally?
Wally.
Yes, question.
Yeah. Does Israel have a milchama reshut to add land?
Not to add land, but it's a milchemet mitzvah to defend the country. Now, that's a separate discussion. But I'm going to get to the fact that these vows that was imposed upon Israel are no longer valid, and I'll explain why.
Well, Wally, I remember once, and maybe it was an online conversation or something like that, with somebody from the main group from Rabbi Teitelbaum's group, and they basically told me that Neturei Karta is nothing to do with them. They're rebels from the whole thing. They don't follow halacha. They kind of distance themselves from it. Just for the record, they're not part of the main Satmar group.
I can tell you that this was not the standard position. I remember shortly after I was married, I lived across the street from a shul, the shul that I grew up in, actually. When I was married, I lived like 3 blocks away from where I was born. But if I got up late on a Shabbos morning, there was a Satmar shtibel a few blocks away that started davening at 9:30 in the morning. So occasionally I would go there to daven. And I can tell you with 100% certainty, and this was right after the 6-Day War, that they were very opposed to the state of Israel politically.
No, the Satmars themselves are not, but they don't uphold by the some of the craziness of
whether they may not support the craziness of Neturei Karta, but they're still very anti-Zionist.
They won't go to Tehran and celebrate the Holocaust or something like that. That's out. That they consider to be way out of line.
They may not be as right. Okay, good. Now,
that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Most rabbinical authorities are of the opinion that since the third oath about nations subjugating Israel has not been kept by the nations of the world, therefore the other 2 vows are no longer valid, which sort of deals with that Neturei Karta philosophy and kind of puts it to rest. More importantly, the point that was raised is that safeguarding the lives of Jews, of course, is a milchemes mitzvah, where you have to go out and even a kala mechupaso has to go out and defend the country. So clearly, the political state of Israel is sanctioned by the halacha, and it's interesting to note that before Theodor Herzl began political Zionism in response to the Dreyfus trial, Theodor Herzl was a journalist from Austria who covered the Dreyfus trial, the French officer who was accused of supporting the Germans. And of course, it was nothing more than anti-Semitism. Emile Zola got involved in his famous newspaper article, Jacques Hughes. And but when Herzl who was a totally secular Jew, covering the Dreyfus trial, realized that Jews have no place to go, he devoted his life and his resources to forming what became political Zionism. But even before Theodor Herzl in 1898, even before that, 50 years, 60 years earlier, a number of rabbis in Eastern Europe formed a group called Chovevei Zion. This was the beginning of religious Zionism. Rav Shmuel Molever, Rav Hai Alkalai, and others, or many famous rabbanim, formed what became the basis of religious Zionism to lobby and encourage a creation or a return to Israel. Unfortunately, it didn't have traction. The rabbis did not have the political connections. They didn't have the full-throated support of other rabbis. It wasn't a very widespread movement, and it didn't catch on. It didn't catch on for two reasons. Number one, some people were afraid that it would become a messianic movement, and we had suffered a great deal from that. Some people were afraid that it would introduce elements that were contrary to halacha, and they just couldn't grab enough support. And it was there, but it never really caught on until Herzl. Now, Herzl was able, with his political savvy, to create a movement which ultimately succeeded in the creation of 50 years later to the state of Israel. And it included a number of rabbanim. It included a number of religious leaders, but that was because they shared the vision and they remembered the Chovevei Zion way back when. But they were included in the initial government of Israel, but clearly this was a political movement, not a religious movement. It gave tremendous, what's what I'm looking for, credence to the religious aspect of a return to Zion. They created a chief rabbinate. They gave many sanctions to halacha in certain ways, in terms of Shmira Shabbos, in terms of kashrus, although over the years that has kind of waned, and you can unfortunately buy chazer in Israel today. And the chief rabbinate is recognized as having a certain amount of authority, but many in the rabbinical establishment don't accept the chief rabbinate because it doesn't have total. Most of the chief rabbinate has to do with supervising kashrus and also nominally in charge of conversion. And even there are opposition groups that have their own batei dinim for conversion and also their own certification process. So you can accept the Rabbanut's kashrus, or you can go to Badatz, the Beis Din Tzedek of Yerushalayim, or other groups, because everybody wants their own. It's like I remember many years ago, and in Hallandale, Florida, there used to be a kosher steakhouse, and the non-Jewish waitresses would assist you when you go over the menu, and they would tell you, this is OU kosher, this is Breuer's kosher, this is Satmar Shchita, this is Lubavitch Shchita, because everybody, has their own standards.
Like wolf and
what's that?
Wolf and Lamb. I don't know if it still does, but had various different,
All right. But I don't think it's a positive feature of our Jewish community. But in any event, the Rabbanut in Israel is not as strong as it could be. At one point, Rav Soloveitchik was considered for the position of chief rabbi of Israel and actually went to Israel. But then he asked the following question. He says, does the Rabbanut control Jewish education in Israel? And he was told no. This is done by the Ministry of Education, and whoever is in charge of the Ministry of Education, if it's a religious person, it'll go in one direction. If it's not, it will go in another direction. So I said, what kind of a chief rabbinate doesn't control Jewish education in a Jewish state? And he came back to America, and that was the end of it. So clearly there are issues in Israel, there always have been, but the fact of its creation, the fact that it exists as a homeland for Jew, and every Jew can become a citizen of Israel, and it's an amazing conglomeration of many different cultures, because for a long time the Turks, after World War I, even before, ruled Israel. There's Turkish law, there's British law, there's halacha. Israel still lacks a constitution, which is responsible for the fact that there's no electoral reform in Israel. That's why you have 24 political parties instead of 2 or 3 parties. There are many problems. One of the most severe, I guess, outrages against Israel is the accusation that they are an apartheid state. And of course, we know what's going on in college campuses and other places today, aside from the anti-Semitic aspect of it. But people fail to realize is that those Arabs who did not leave in 1948 with the expectation of coming back and conquering all of the country, those who remained enjoy full citizenship rights. They vote. They occupy positions of authority in every aspect of Israeli government. They serve on the Supreme Court. They serve in the Knesset. They have a higher standard of living than all of their Palestinian brethren. As a matter of fact, it's interesting. Every hotel in Israel has non-Jewish Arab workers, both in the kitchen and also in the administration of the hotel. And I was told that all these jobs are controlled by 7 Arab families. And these 7 Arab families, and there are thousands of members of these families, make it very clear that they will not tolerate any anti-Israeli sentiment among their ranks. Because if you do, you ruin the job prospects for a lot of people. And if you want a good paying job, whether it's as a waiter or a busboy or a manager or a check-in clerk or a housekeeper, whatever it might be, from these families, you support Israel. And many, many Arabs do. And the apartheid accusation is simply a bold-faced lie. So we celebrate Israel in many different ways. We celebrate it by helping it to exist, by supporting it. We celebrate it by not second-guessing the people who live there, who make the decisions that affect their lives. We celebrate it by parades. We celebrate it by bonking people on the head with those plastic hammers, by barbecues, and of course by the recitation of Hallel in most synagogues. It's interesting that some people adopt the principle of saying only half Hallel, which is interesting, because just like the famous Medrash, why do we recite Hallel, full Hallel on the first day of Pesach, first 2 days of Pesach, and the rest of the week we only recite half Hallel? Fascinating Medrash, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu after the Kriyas Yamsuf, when the Egyptian army drowned, says, Ma'aseh yadai tovu bayom v'atem otem omrim shira. The Egyptians, as odious as they may have been, they're also my creation. They're human beings. They died. So how can you sing shira? How can you sing praise when so many people were killed in order for you to exist. So here too, many people, because many Jews died in Milchemet HaShichrur, in the War of Independence, and in other wars defending Israel, unfortunately, including the current conflict. So how do you recite full Shira? How do you recite full Hallel when many people died in order to secure that particular freedom that they enjoy in Israel? So it's an interesting dialogue, but most synagogues will recite full Hallel without a bracha. Those of a more Zionistic bent will recite a bracha. Some will say the Tekes Liyom with the holiday Sukkot de Zimra and the special Haftorah. There's no Kriyas HaTorah, but there's a Haftorah. And I remember one of my teachers, Meir Hershkovitz Zal. He was a teacher of Jewish history and Nach, great teacher. And he said that we have to make this into a yontif. We have to teach our children to celebrate it. Children should come dressed up the way they do on Shabbos. It's a celebration. Even though we're right now in a serious conflict with the terrorist groups that want to destroy us, and unfortunately with many nations of the world who agree with them, and many uninformed people, especially young college students, who don't really understand their own history, much less the conflict going on in the Middle East. We have to, if we want this eventually to become a yontif, we have to celebrate it as such. Come to shul dressed up, say Hallel with kavanah, sing it out loud. When I was in Montreal, for a very short time, I was an actual synagogue rabbi, and we invited Shlomo Carlebach every Yom Ha'atzmaut. And I will tell you that there were more people in shul that night than there were on Yom Kippur, because the whole town celebrated. And he led a beautiful ma'ariv with singing and all types. It was a wonderful thing. So there are those who celebrated beginning the night before, those who celebrated during the day. But it's important for us and for our children to, in order for this to eventually become a full-fledged yontif, and it'll take a while, but we have to do our best to ensure that people understand the halachic significance of a return to Eretz Yisrael, the halachic imperative to recite Hallel when a tremendous miracle occurs, and the fact that we were able to be victorious over all the nations that attacked us in 1948, who are still out to destroy Israel. Again, what the world fails to understand, it's not just the terrorist groups. Don't make the mistake of thinking it's only the PLO or Hamas or the other groups. Islam as a religion, radical Islam especially, its goal, forgetting about Israel, the goal of Islam, you look at the Quran, is world domination, period. Look at Indonesia. Look at all these. They're taking over country after country. The number of Muslims in the world, they may not be anti-Zionist specifically, but the goal is to take over the world. That is their goal. Israel is only one piece of it. But the terrorists are radical Muslims, and it's their theology that is motivating them. So don't make the mistake of thinking it's just political. It's religious as well. I wish you all a good Shabbos, and I hope you all have fun on Yom Ha'atzmaut and eat a lot of falafel, bonk your people on the head, have a barbecue. But it's important that we celebrate the fact that we now have an Israel as well, because our parents and grandparents only dreamed about something that many people,
I know, I
unfortunately,
put it there because it was
take for
wet.
granted.